Today's briefing is about passion plays, enactments of the events in Holy Week which led to Jesus' death and resurrection. And they're being held in towns and cities across Britain. But this year there's a heightened vigilance about anti-Semitism in the content and advice to producers to be vigilant. Joining us to discuss the issues are the Reverend Dr. Nathan Eddy, the co-director of Council of Christians and Jews, Dr. Katie Turner, a consultant on visual depictions of the Bible, Professor Jolyon Mitchell, principal of St John's College, Durham, Charlotte de Clee, the producer of the Wintershall Passion of Jesus in Trafalgar Square, Rabbi Debbie Young-Summers from Edgware and Hendon Reform Synagogue, and Alex Stewart-Clark, a trustee of the Passion Trust. So thank you all very much for joining us today. I'm going to start with you, Jolyon, if I may, and assuming no knowledge at all of the story of this Easter week, can you walk us through the key points in the story of what happened in Holy Week from Palm Sunday to Easter Day?
The tradition, and it's celebrated in lots of different ways all over the world, in Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, of the Passion Week begins with Palm Sunday, Jesus coming in on a donkey, being celebrated by crowds. Some scholars think there may have been another procession going in, a Pilate also coming at the other end of the city. So you have these two contrasting kind of processions. And then moving on from that, traditionally, some people think on the Monday, Jesus goes into the temple and turns the tables over, throws out the money changers. That's sometimes thought to be during Passion Week as well. And then moving to Mount of Olives, where he looks over the city, it goes quieter in the middle of the week and then goes on to Thursday, where they move to the so-called upper room in Jerusalem, where they have the well-known Last Supper, where bread and wine are shared together. And at this moment, Jesus predicts his death. And then from that moment, he goes out, and there's a moment in Gethsemane where he is arrested, put on trial, both by the religious and the political authorities in different places. He's then tortured, taken through the streets, carrying his cross through the streets of Jerusalem, and he's crucified outside the city on Friday, on Good Friday. Saturday goes quiet again, often known as Holy Saturday, and this quiet moment. In the Passion plays that we'll look at, all sorts of things sometimes are represented as happening on Easter Saturday. And then, of course, on Easter Sunday, 3 days after his crucifixion, the belief which is affirmed all over the world in different ways and at different places is that Jesus comes back to life, so conquers death. That's a very brief summary, and all sorts of people could add different things to that. But obviously it's been represented in lots of different ways, in passion plays, in mystery plays, for many decades, not only in the UK, but all over the world.
And Oberammergau is the most famous, perhaps, but I was reading that dates from the 17th century. That was the first one there.
Correct. And that, of course, was famously set up by the village as a way of almost making a promise to God that, well, we'll put this play on if you don't hit us with the plague. And supposedly ever since they haven't been touched by the plague. And that's been going on since 1633. This has, it's a huge attraction still. It was put on recently. It's normally put on every 10 years. It was postponed because of COVID, and attracts something like 500,000 people around the world. It has, as has been noted, particularly in the early 20th century and the 19th century, a troubling history in terms of how it has depicted some of the Jewish authorities, Jewish figures. It's now bent over backwards, really, to try and face its troubling history. It includes rabbis to look at it, to critique it, and to try and understand both its troubling history, but how can you represent this story without falling into the trap of being anti-Semitic?
Thank you. And we're going to come back to you later, Jolyon, as you listen to the contributions of our other panelists. But we're going to start with Alex Stewart-Clark. Alex, you're a trustee of the Passion Trust, which is an organisation within Britain that gives advice, would that be correct, to the people in the towns and cities across the country who are putting on passion plays. Could I perhaps first of all ask you, how many passion plays are actually being held in Britain this year that you know of?
I think, according to the website, it's about 19. Lindsay Brady, who's the administrator, that finds them out, and then usually gets in contact with the organisers. We're a trust that's set up to facilitate them. The vision is to bring the Passion Play to every town and city across the UK. A third of the world believe in Jesus. They believe in God. And the message, the more we get the message out to everyone, to the masses, the better it is.
Right, so it's quite an evangelistic aim. What kind of advice do you give? Do you write all their scripts? Do you give them a list of where they can buy costumes? What kind of advice do you give?
Well, if it's a public performance, it involves the council, involves the churches, involves the communities, the clubs, and bringing all those groups of people together, it can be a bit of a challenge, especially sort of closing high streets down and dealing with health and safety and crowd movement, and raising funds and getting actors and screens and things like that. So there's a lot to it. And there are quite a few people who are retired who put passion plays on with a lot of advice to give, can do it freely. And by providing a forum and a sort of annual conference where we can help each other to facilitate each other's plays, then that all helps.
How long have you been going, and have you experienced this resurgence in passion plays that people have spoken about?
Well, it all started with Charlotte's father, who started the passion plays down in Wintershall. Then Dad put it on in Scotland. And then I put I put a play down in Brighton, and then in putting it on, but because I'm a businessman, I want to see how things work. There was this distinct lack of sort of what was it, help. So you had to ask and phone, and so that's when we started the Passion Trust to help, so we could talk to each other and help each other put these plays on.
And you yourself have acted in one of these plays. You mentioned it there, that you were in the Brighton Passion play in 2011. What part did you play?
Well, Ruth, I'm a terrible actor. So when they're scraping the barrel, there isn't anyone. So I was given the centurion's role, which is it's a one sentence. And I even messed that up. So so I'm better at organising things.
Thank you for joining us. I think you mentioned Charlotte there. Is this Charlotte Declee, the producer of the Wintershall Passion of Jesus in Trafalgar Square, the same Charlotte? Tell us a little bit more about this bigger event in Trafalgar Square. How many years have you been producing it now?
About 12 years, and it takes place mostly down in Surrey, but we then started taking it out to Guildford first and then to London.
What are the logistical difficulties of putting on the play in Trafalgar Square?
We have to go to the Greater London Authority, the GLA, to get permission to use Trafalgar Square. And then, of course, there's all the health and safety, security, and endless bits of admin, really.
How many people are involved both in the production and the characters? How many people does it involve?
Well, over 100 people. And then, then there's so many people behind the scenes, from costumes to security to the office. It's quite big. And 99% of them are volunteers. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to put it on.
So you're the producer of it. Do you also direct it as well?
No, I don't. I've got two directors, actually, Polly King and Ashley Herman.
Are they professional? Do you use professional actors?
Nobody is professional now. They're some involved in theatre, but the man who plays Jesus is a 28-year-old secondary school teacher. So we don't have any professionals.
Why do you do it?
To tell the story of Easter, to tell the story of what happened to Jesus in the final week of his death. I think people know a lot about what happened at Christmas and the Nativity and baby Jesus, but not many people seem to know about the story of Easter.
Is it evangelistic in purpose, as has just been described with the Passion Trust?
We tell it because it's cultural, it's educational, it's historical, and if it's spiritual for you, that's wonderful. But we're just telling the story.
Can I just ask you a few questions now about the heightened tension in society today after the attack in Israel on the 7th of October and the rise in anti-Semitic attacks, both verbal and physical, and the fear that's around as well for Jews in Britain? How much of a consideration has that been in the way that you are producing the show this year? Are there things that you've left out, changes that you've made?
Yes, we are really aware, more so now than we were before. So I've learned a lot in this last year, thanks to Nathan's guidance and just opening our rather naive eyes in a way to how the Jewish people would perceive it. So we have tried to, we have moderated the clothing. We don't use the talit, the prayer shawls, or the kippah. We never did anyway. Use the kippahs, but we've taken out the word priest from a lot of the script and put authority in. I'm going to read a statement at the beginning of the play to say in no way is this meant to be anti-Semitic, with the rise of tension with Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. We've got to be super aware, and Christians are called to really try and remember to live their faith as much as more than ever before, really. And so, and what I want to say, and I'm still working on the wording, is that we're all guilty of crucifying Jesus. We're all guilty. We're even guilty today. So we're all guilty. And it is. I mean, if it was in Switzerland, they'd all be Swiss. It just happened to be in Israel, and that they're all Jewish at that time. But it was the Romans who crucified Christ, and the crowds who crucified Christ, and for different motivations. The soldiers who hit the nails, it's different motivations, but it has appeared to fall on the Jewish religious, that we've now tried to make it more authoritarian than actually the priests.
I was interested when you said that you've particularly learned a lot over the last year, the last few months, in your consideration of how the play is produced. Because last year you did come in for a lot of criticism. There was an article in the Jewish Chronicle that said that the play was religious hatred as public entertainment supported by the authorities. How did you respond to that?
To be honest, the person who wrote that article wasn't there, and it was supposition. And I took it immediately to Rabbi Thomas Solomon, who is a rabbi of Westminster who knows of the script before it goes out, and I asked for his advice. I took it to a KC practicing Jewish friend of mine called Stephen Rubin. Both of them looked at it. I went to Nathan and Georgina at the Council of British Jews. I appeared in front of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and I couldn't apologize more. But actually what he said in the article wasn't accurate, but nobody's, once it's in paper, it's on paper. So there's nothing I can do about that. I responded to the Jewish Chronicle, and I've learned a lot. Nathan's put us all on a course, and it's been very, very helpful.
Thank you. Well, perhaps we can talk to the Reverend Dr. Nathan Eddy now, the co-director of the Council of Christians and Jews. And we interviewed you, Nathan, for an article on our website about this whole area. And you said there is a connection between passion plays and anti-Semitism, and people are forgetful of that. Can you just expand on that a bit for us?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having CCJ on this call. The Council of Christians and Jews is an interfaith charity. So I'm a Christian co-director, and I have a Jewish co-director colleague. I'm not Jewish. I don't know. I don't speak for the Jewish community, but I care as a Christian about how Jews are represented in Christian preaching and passion plays and other ways. And I do think that Christians can be forgetful of our past legacy, our shameful legacy of what we have to acknowledge as persecution of Jewish people. Thankfully, in Britain today, in the UK today, we celebrate a situation of tolerance and respect, I think, between religions, although this is a really tough time for many people of faith. And I'm just aware in the Jewish community, as a Christian, I'm really alarmed to read reports from the Community Security Trust, for example, which detail 36 cases in the last year, according to the report, where someone was spat on because they were Jewish. 111 cases where a school child was abused because someone thought they were Jewish. So we have to, as Christians, we have to let that sink in and appreciate how Jews and other people, other faiths as well, but Jewish people as well can be targets of abuse. And it's not just in the past. It's also today. We have to come together as Christians to fight that and help make Jewish people and other faiths as well feel welcome in this country that we enjoy and that we should rightly celebrate as a place and a beacon for tolerance.
Is it possible to tell the story of this week, this Holy Week, without being anti-Semitic?
Yes. So I think of course it is. I think we should take care as Christians in the way we tell it. We should take care, if we have Jewish neighbors near our church, or if there's a synagogue down the street, what it might feel like if we were to have a Palm Sunday procession with a cross and we passed a synagogue. We have to try to imagine what that might feel like, possibly. So it's not just our intentions. Most Christians, I think, have very good intentions in sharing the gospel, sharing the good news. But the way it's received, the way it's perceived, might not match up with our intentions as Christians. We have to make a special effort to engage with our neighbors, to see how it's received, to understand how they might be feeling right now. It's really critical. So it's possible, but anti-Semitism is not just about our intentions and what we think. I can share a joke that I might think is fine. I know I'm not racist. But, if it causes offense, then I better listen to someone who shares with me that it might be anti-Semitic. It's not just what we think about ourselves. It's how our Jewish neighbors and other faith neighbors perceive us to be.
What kind of advice is given to producers of these dramas to remove anti-Semitism? For example, what words specifically would you call on to be removed?
That's a tricky question. That's why we're all here on this call. I think it's a very sensitive production to put on, a passion play. It's not for every context. I wouldn't personally say, as a Christian, I wouldn't universally promote it for every church or every community. I think it depends. I think they can be wonderful occasions, but they can also be occasions where there's concerns that I would have. So it's really I wouldn't come up with a list of terms right now on this call, but I would, I'm happy. CCJ is happy to speak with you and to help anyone interested in engaging with us about our views. And there's some other experts on this call as well. It's great to have Katie Turner here in particular. I think it's just something to be very cautious about, especially in public, especially at the moment now. So I wouldn't advise a specific list of terms, but just that churches really consider it carefully.
There's one particular verse in the Matthew account of the Passion, the blood libel verse. Do you think that should be part of a passion play or removed?
Yeah, his blood be on us and on our children. Matthew Matthew 28. Do I have that right? Any better Bible, New Testament
27.
people?
Oh, good
27.
Bible.
There we go.
27, yeah.
I would certainly advocate. I would really caution public performances about including that verse. If only just because I'm not sure, Charlotte, if you use it in Wintershall, and you may have your reasons for doing so, but that verse in particular, you've put your finger on it, has been the cause of accusations of the Jewish crime of killing Christ, of deicide, and that's echoed horribly down the centuries. And Jewish people have been persecuted in part because of the lies spread about interpretations of that verse. So I would really, if you had to single out one verse, I think you put your finger on it.
So moving on to Katie Turner. Katie, you're a consultant on visual depictions of the Bible. We've just been talking there about the words that might be removed to make sure that anti-Semitism isn't a feature or as part of the plays. But can I ask you about your own take on the Passion plays and your advice on clothing in particular?
I think focusing on the words is very important, but in any sort of dramatic production, the words are accompanied with a visual, with staging, casting, costuming, what sort of music is being incorporated. So that's not so much visual as just more of the multi-dimensional nature of a theatrical production. And far too often when we have had these conversations about removing anti-Semitism from Passion dramas, those conversations have been really focused on the text. And that's important, but that needs to go along with everything else. So I think we're really behind in the work that needs to be done.
When I was talking to you about this yesterday, you mentioned it could be as simple as removing hats or changing the length of a garment. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, most of what we see in Passion dramas today is based in the history of the Christian artistic tradition. There is a very widespread misconception that the Oriental way that we depict the biblical world is historically accurate. It's not historically accurate. It's not based on any evidence that we have for first century clothing. It is very much rooted in Christian anti-Semitism and Orientalism over the centuries. So starting in the 16th century, a lot of Christian artists and travelers started to make pilgrimages to the Holy Land, or even to places that they thought were a way station to the Holy Land, so to Venice or to Turkey. And they would observe the way that people were dressed there and then draw that back into the biblical world, on the assumption that the way people in the Eastern Mediterranean of their own time were dressing was the way people in the first century would have dressed. And that assumption is rooted in an idea of an ahistorical nature of those who are heathen. So heathen populations just haven't changed over time. They haven't civilized. They haven't developed in the way that the Christian world has developed. And so this becomes part of how they conceptualize the biblical world. So when Passion dramas today are costuming, and they are costuming using turbans and kafaya. A kafaya is a headdress that is bound at the crown with a cord. Most commonly, I think, for young children in this country, it would be a tea towel in a nativity play, would be emulating a kafaya. So all of these things are rooted in Orientalism. They are based on what Islamic populations from the 16th through the 19th century were wearing when Western Christian artists visited. So when we continue to replicate that in Passion dramas, there's an implicit Islamophobia that might also be happening alongside the anti-Semitism in those depictions. So it's a really big thing to shift. It becomes all the more problematic when the Passion dramas market themselves as historically accurate, because we continue to present this idea that the Christian artistic tradition is in some way rooted in historical evidence for the first century.
What would you advocate then that producers of Passion plays do to change the way that they dress the characters? What makes a particular gown anti-Semitic just by looking at it?
I wouldn't say that a particular gown on its own is anti-Semitic, but the history of the artistic tradition has these elements in it. And so we are inadvertently replicating those elements when that is what we are basing costumes on. Then there's also ways that costumes are used. It's also in the art, but we can have visual hierarchies on display. So we might have the religious authorities, if we're going to use the word authority, depicted with a turban. And then on top of the turban, they have a veil. And then on top of that veil, they have another veil. So there's just a lot of headgear going on. And then the crowd might have just a turban. And then as we move closer to Jesus, the head coverings become more and more minimal until Jesus is with his head uncovered completely. And so this is creating a visual hierarchy that ends up playing into a narrative hierarchy. There's also color stories and patterns. We get a lot of ostentation in the presentation of the Jewish characters, whereas Jesus and his disciples will be stripped of any ostentation. They are humble and modest. We also have a black and white dynamic. So we have the religious authorities in black and Jesus and the disciples in white. And that plays in a very well-entrenched cultural tradition of black versus white signifying the good guys versus the bad guys. So all of this stuff is going on. And I think that in terms of what we should do, it's really important for people producing passion dramas to engage with Jewish voices, absolutely. But they need to be engaging with academics as well, who really understand the full complexity of the tradition.
You mentioned to me when we were discussing this earlier that for you, the best passion plays that you've seen are the ones in contemporary settings. Why do you believe that?
I think because they have really removed but that shift into the contemporary setting alone doesn't necessarily remove this stuff. So Jesus Christ Superstar, the film version, is a good example of like sort of contemporary-ish that still has a lot of Orientalism, still has the priests in black. But it is easier to avoid the complexity of all of these issues when you shift into a contemporary setting. So my two go-to examples that I thought were just spectacular, and I wouldn't think that there was anything anti-Semitic or in the legacy of like the Christian anti-Judaic tradition that had been preserved in them. It's a 2012 revival of the York Mystery Plays, which was just beautifully done and set in mid-century Yorkshire. And then The Passion of Port Talbot, which was put on by Michael Sheen in Wales. It was a 3-day thing, and it was set in the 21st century in Wales. So it was really localized. It really spoke to that community's particular issues and creates a direct connection for that community with the moral and theological importance for Christians of the Passion story.
Thank you. Thanks, Katie. Rabbi Debbie Young-Summers from the Edgware and Hendon Reform Synagogue. We've had quite a few speakers now in the discussion. Can you tell us what is the feeling among the Jewish communities that you minister to and that you know about passion plays? Are they greatly exercised about the fact that these are taking place at all?
I mean, honestly, I think most people aren't very aware of them unless they're really local to them. And I think those who are conscious would hope that it's part of a local celebration and would probably steer clear with good reason historically. We feel acutely the fact that Easter weekend has been a excuse, a motivation historically for extraordinarily violent pogroms and attacks. Yes, we could say that is, historical. It's 100 years ago or 80 years ago. But actually, I absolutely know examples of people who've experienced that kind of anti-Semitism today. In fact, one of my favorite stories growing up was of slightly distant from a passion story, but connected to that same anti-Semitism that does the rounds at this time of year, was, growing up in a leafy Hertfordshire village, there was a letter that would be circulated, I think over about a 5-year period, where local residents were warned not to let their children play out on the streets because Jews would be on the hunt for blood for their matzot for Passover. Absolutely outrageous anti-Semitic claims that, don't directly come from the Passion Play, but link back to this narrative of Jews as Christ killer, child killer. And it's the real impact today is still there if the wording is wrong.
We've heard in the last few months that there's such fear in the Jewish communities that many feel fearful about even leaving their home, that children going to school don't wear the uniform, there's no identification of their faith. Is there that kind of discussion around going to Trafalgar Square or being in a town or city somewhere where there's a passion play put on in the town centre? Have you heard anything about that this year?
I haven't. It doesn't mean it hasn't happened. And I think with a lot of these things, it's a mixed picture. My children go to school in their school uniforms with their kippot, and they ask why there is extra security and why are the police here more often. And they have lots of questions about what's happening. But there are people for whom there are real attacks, and that, my husband has experienced anti-Semitism on the street in the last few months. And there are plenty of people who haven't experienced it. A lot of it is a mixed picture of where people are experiencing different things. I think I'm comforted by the wonderful speakers that are here today who are addressing this history where anti-Semitism is rooted. A lot of what goes on today, people aren't conscious of how connected to thousands of years of Christian anti-Semitism it is. And there are wonderful resources out there like Bruce Thompson's Echoes of Contempt, and places where we can really understand the impact that this has had on the community. To literally, congregants of mine who are converts, in fact, being called Christ killers at the supermarket checkouts because they're wearing a Star of David. And these things are real and they do happen. So separating out those narratives and understanding the impact of the narrative is really important.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us. So Professor Jolyon Mitchell, Principal of St John's College, Durham, we return to you now, having heard all the contributions. I wonder what your overriding feeling is about the way that the atmosphere in society today is changing the way that people are thinking about passion plays. This isn't new. There have been discussions about anti-Semitism for many years, but how do you view the discussion this year in particular about the content of passion plays?
I think it's been heightened and amplified by what's been happening, obviously, in the Middle East, though it's not a new discussion. I've been involved in a research project with two postdocs, Lindsay Brady and Giselle Benson, who we've been interviewing actors, producers, directors all over the country, not just the Port Talbot and the York plays that Katie mentioned, but the dozens of other plays. And I think what struck me over the last decade is how often producers and directors really, really care about this troubling history, this aspect. And they have tried very hard, as Charlotte demonstrated, to try not to put those anti-Semitic, either visually or through words in the public sphere. And I think that's been heightened this year, though, because of obviously what's been going on. And I think it's been interesting hearing from directors and producers about how now they're trying to bring not just rabbis into the conversation, but also as consultants, but also now that I've met Muslims, Jewish actors who participate in passion plays as well, which is quite interesting. There's a sort of a dynamic here that these can be points of, whilst they have a troubling history, they can, if used appropriately, be points of peace building as well. That's difficult, particularly given what Rabbi Debbie was saying in terms of the history. And I've met some rabbis who said they've got such a toxic history they shouldn't be put on, but other rabbis saying no, they can be, as long as we're aware of that difficult history. So I think there's an ongoing debate going on. But for example, in Abraham, the pilot is represented in effectively as a Nazi. I mean, not explicitly, but it's pretty clear. And Jesus is very much a Jew. So, and of course he was. So in a way, it's making very clear, it's turning its own history on head visually there, by saying, well, actually, the reason for the killing of Jesus as a Jew was, can we see it as part of a tradition of anti-Semitism?
Do you account for the fact that passion plays are so popular that there's been a resurgence in recent years? What's behind that?
Well, I think there's a whole range of reasons and motivations, and we've heard some of those already today, but we've found through the interviews, it varies from beliefs. Some people believe that this is absolutely the foundational story of the world, and if we need to put it out in the public sphere, in the public square. So it's belief, it's devotion. Some people see this as a devotional act. This is something that we do through Easter week, Passion Week, and it's something that we have to do. But other people, they say, well, we're stepping in a historical tradition. This goes back to the Middle Ages. In York and Chester, actors, directors say that we have to hold on, preserve this tradition, which is not just passion plays, but also mystery plays as well. Others, it's community participation. They say we have to be part of this community. It's a family. I've met some people who've said that, for example, I think of one person who lost their husband to cancer tragically and had not been out of the house and joined a passion play. And it became, she said, it part of a family and helped to go back into the world. Others say, actually, I don't believe any of this. I love the story and I want to just act. I like acting. I'm an accountant and I want to act. It's interesting that Greg Doran, the director of the 2016 York Minster production, he said, we return to these plays again and again because they're asking the most profound questions about who we are, where we're going, and what it means to be alive. And for him, that was it's very striking reflection that I've heard from a number of directors and producers who wouldn't necessarily identify as Christians, say there's something about this story that we just have to wrestle with, perform, and put in the public sphere.
What is the impact on the actors, particularly perhaps those who play the part of Jesus?
Well, again, talking to the actors, it's sometimes profound. I mean, it's just often just saying you can't do this role without it changing you. Again, we've interviewed not just Jesus, but also the figure who's play the mothers of the babies who were murdered in the Massacre of the Innocents. And again, actors say that this just is traumatic to do because it relates perhaps to own trauma and heartbreak in their own lives, but also to think about the trauma and heartbreak, the Massacre of Innocents that are going on now around the world. And so the story of Jesus is seen as relating to contemporary issues that has relevance to what's going on now. And also, of course, that leads other people to say, well, it actually, to portray Jesus, this is a devotional act, and it makes me think differently about crucifixion and differently about resurrection.
Your research is going to lead you to produce a book. I think we should allow you to make a plug for that as well. But how do you explain the fact that while affiliation to Christianity is in decline in Western countries, interest in passion plays is rising? There are more and more being put on. How do you explain that?
Well, it's interesting. Michael Billington, the Guardian critic, said there's a strange paradox in this increasingly secular Britain, and yet these plays are coming back. There's revivals, resurgence. And I think we've found there's a whole range of reasons for that, which I've sort of described different reasons for that. And it's not just people wanted to be evangelistic, to point to Jesus as the figure that makes sense of the world. But it's also, there's this sense that we're in this long historical tradition. I think it is also community participation. What we found in Port Talbot was sometimes described as a secular passion play, was that this was an articulation of the grief of the community, of the local community. It was saying, these are the heartbreaks we've had. There's a road cut through Port Talbot. And this relates to this story, which is not quite the story of Jesus, but kind of like that. So in a way, it's located in place. It's located not just in place, but also in current trauma and heartbreak. I've got a bell. This is giving me going to me next to me here because I'm just close to Durham Cathedral at this moment. But it reminds me that passion plays took place and mystery plays not just in the cathedral, but also outside in the public sphere. So in a way, it's putting religion back into the public sphere. I've read a really interesting article recently by Catherine Peppenster, and she articulates some of the difficulties of that, but nevertheless, it is happening, and there is this resurgence. There are hundreds, thousands of people who are involved in these plays around the world, and that may be as far afield as in the Philippines, where people will actually crucify themselves, almost literally putting nails through their hands, through to plays that are going on in different parts of the Netherlands, where they have pop stars and massive audiences watching these plays. So, in other words, this is a phenomenon which is diffracted into all sorts of different shapes and forms. There isn't just a single kind of passion play. There is a kaleidoscope of them going on around the UK and around the world.
What's your book called, Jolyon, and when's it coming out?
Passion play. The Mysterious Resurgence of Religious Drama. It's coming out next year with OUP. And part of the argument of this book is looking, really just simply saying, why is there this resurgence? Why is it going on? And it's been, for me, it has been actually really humbling to find out the different people who've made massive sacrifices in these plays. And also, they recognize some of the difficulties of the history. But they're saying, well, actually, we recognize that the difficulty of the history, but we do want these plays to be forms of building peace in the public sphere, not leading to what they sometimes did in the Middle Ages.
Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists for your contributions. The floor is open now for people to ask questions or make comments. I will come to you, Suzanne, from the Cutting Edge Theatre in a moment. But Laura, first of all, Laura Marks has her hand up.
Thank you for having me on. I sort of feel there's very few Jews on this call. I think Debbie's the only Jewish speaker, and so I'm sort of deliberately speaking as a Jew, if you like, and I think that particularly in the current climate, it's awfully difficult to put on this sort of play or this sort of thing without it feeling anti-Semitic to Jews. I think that there is a visceral anxiety throughout the Jewish community at the moment. And I think that it's really hard to put on something that is about on this topic without Jews feeling anxious. And obviously this is a core part of Christianity, the Christian story, and obviously the plays go back hundreds, if not thousands of years. So it's a really big challenge to work out how we put on these plays without provoking this sort of response in the Jewish community. And just two little examples. I mean, I know it's not a passion play, but if you think about, I always think about Jesus Christ Superstar and the film of it, and in it, the people who the Pharisees are so clearly Jewish bankers. It's got so full of anti-Semitic tropes that it's hard to escape from it, and it's very, very difficult to avoid it completely. And one other just little example, which also was not from Britain, but I was in Italy a few years ago during Easter, and there was a parade going through the town with thumping drums, a huge figure of Christ and crosses, and people in Ku Klux Klan type hats and torches. And I remember thinking, I don't feel good here at all. I feel very anxious. And that was long before the political situation became as difficult as it is now. So I would just say that I hear how much people are trying to avoid the anti-Semitic tropes, and I'm very grateful to the way in which you're approaching the topic. But I think in the current climate, it's awfully difficult for the Jewish community not to feel anxious.
Do you think they should not take place this year, Laura?
I think it's not for me to tell people what to do, but I think an additional layer of sensitivity needs to be put on, a sort of sense of how will this be viewed, and are we doing anything which reinforces the stereotypical negative views of Jews, which can so easily be fallen into, much more easily, I think, than people think.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Katie Turner, who is Jewish as well, just to set the record straight. Katie, you've got your hand up to reply.
I just wanted to interject that I am Jewish. And so I do think about this as from an academic point of view, but I am also thinking about these issues very much from a personal point of view and from how my community is feeling at the moment. And I just kind of want to echo what Laura has said, like, I'm not going to come in and tell people what they should and shouldn't be doing. But at the same time, no matter the positive intentions that people go into putting these plays on with, there are so many deeply entrenched issues that I think most people just haven't done the work, really, to identify and spot them all. And if we haven't done the work to identify and spot them all, then we aren't removing them all. And so we are replicating them. And just a comment from my rabbi, who I was talking to recently on a related issue, that there should be an increase in rigor that is undertaken in proportion to the increase in tension. And I'm not sure that has happened yet.
Well, I mean, I probably think the most thorough precautions that I've seen taken by the primary passion play in the UK is by Charlotte in Trafalgar Square. She started this 15 years ago. In Brighton, we passed our script via a rabbi so that the Jewish community. So I think there's a bit of an oversensitivity, and I can understand it from the Jewish community. I'm on the side of the Jewish community. It's fantastic. I support them, and we in the Passion Trust, what little we can do for all the passion plays across the nation, we write up advice of what to do to take this sensitivity away, to take any forms of anti-Semitism that provoke fear and worry. So whether that advice is taken, and because of all the anti-Semitic feeling that's come up in the press and in the marches, I think that most of the plays are very conscious of it. So although I hear these comments on this chat show, I think the passion play community have done more to try and counteract this worry than people think. So that's my opinion. Yeah.
Suzanne, you were mentioned in the chat box as being someone who had produced passion plays for many years. So Suzanne Loftus from Cutting Edge Theatre. Where do you put on your plays?
We're in Edinburgh.
Okay.
I'm not sure why Alex said Charlotte taught me everything I know. We've done lots of different versions over the years, so we don't do the same one every year. I've just been having a side conversation with Katie there when she was talking about black and white, and I was like, oh my word, all our religious authorities are in black and white. So I just sent her a picture and she went, no, definitely change that. I think, interestingly enough, so I'm a director of Cutting Edge Theatre, and we do lots of different work there, is, and this is what I was talking to Katie about, theatrically trying to make sure. So the reason our priests and our religious authorities are in black and white is so that you can spot them really quickly in a large open air. And I'm sure Charlotte has this in Trafalgar Square. And it's the same reason that, not that I necessarily agree with it, but Jesus' mother Mary is in blue and white. You can find her really quickly. Jesus has, although we've changed his costume this year, but usually something that you can spot him really quickly. So it is about trying to bring, I guess, from our point of view, the theatrical together with making sure that we are not going backwards and pandering to, what Katie is saying, that kind of fake historical look in it, and actually thinking a bit more creatively and stylistically, maybe, and this is something the Royal Shakespeare Company are very good at doing, is their productions tend to be very eclectic, so mixing time periods so that they are actually not making a set statement about a set time period. And maybe budget permitting, we don't even know if we can continue next year. But maybe that's a way to go, and actually to look at being more eclectic in the costumes and the music and the set, etc.
What about the particular point about the needing a rigorous approach to understanding how anti-Semitism can creep into a passion play? What assurance can you give the people who've commented on the call that you've been rigorous in your preparation for your play this year?
I think for us that we have removed any word that said Jew or Jewish. We don't actually have a lot in it. We tend to be quite vague, and this is a brand new script for us. So actually what we are looking at this year, although it's a traditional version, traditional costume, is the voices of the women. So we've been actually highlighting them as opposed to the other male characters, the disciples and the religious authorities. And what we actually have said, and the religious authorities say, we are under the tyranny of Rome. So we've tried to kind of set the scene as to what is happening in the place at that time, in that the Romans are there, and there's a lot of oppression on that. So really try to make it very equal. I think it'd be interesting to hear the panel, actually, because we had in the text of the Sermon of the Mount, and I felt, when we first started last year, I felt this was a really powerful line, and I wanted to keep it in, but in light of what we're talking about today, I think we might have to take it out. And it's where Jesus says, there is neither male nor female, nor slave nor free person, nor Jew nor Gentile. And I felt that was really powerful, in that it was kind of saying we're all humanity and we're all together. But I think that we should remove the neither Jew nor Gentile, because I feel it might be too. I don't know. I'd be really interested to hear Katie and Rabbi Debbie and anybody's view on that. I felt it was really powerful, but perhaps it's too inflammatory.
As a Jewish community, it's not for me to tell others what they can and can't do and how they can and can't do. There is much in the Passion story that, as we discussed earlier from Matthew, those lines can be really painful, and we know are the root of anti-Semitic attacks. It's very hard in the midst of a production to go into the level of study and exchange and engagement with each pattern of words and what it means and how it's heard. One of the challenges I'm really conscious of, as someone that does go out into the world and speak to lots of non-Jewish groups, there is 250,000 Jews in the entirety of the UK. Most people who see a Passion play in their local village or town will probably never knowingly meet a Jew. And therefore, what you represent on the stage and in your words speaks to people about that's what Jews are. That's who Jews are now and for eternity. And that's a huge responsibility.
Thank you. I'd like to end the whole thing, because we're almost at the end of the hour, going back to Charlotte, if I may. Just ask you about your Passion play in Trafalgar Square, which is this Friday, Good Friday. What are you hoping will be the outcome this year in particular when it comes to the impact on people, particularly of building community? What are you hoping the impact of the Passion play will be?
We love each other more, and we accept each other more, and we're all different, and we're all guilty, and we're all responsible. And actually, if you just take the two great commandments of loving God and loving your neighbor, that's what I want. That's what I hope that they will get through hearing the story of Jesus.
Thank you. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining the call today.